Welcome to Autism ADHD TV. It is the place to be for parents and professionals. I'm your host, Holly Blanc Moses, the mom psychologist who gets it. We dive into all kinds of important information like behavior, social skills, and learning. All right, let's get started. Amy Gravino, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Holly. Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, let me just tell, I know a lot of our watchers and listeners know your work already, but I'm going to introduce you real quick.
Sure.
Amy is an autism sexuality advocate and relationship coach in the Center for Adult Autism Services at Rutgers University. She is also the president of ASCOT Consulting, which offers autism consulting and mentoring services for organizations, schools, and individuals on the autism spectrum and their families. Amy is an international speaker, an award-winning writer, and currently serves on the board of directors of several autism organizations. So again, welcome, Amy. We are thrilled that you're here today.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
So we're talking about such an important topic, identifying and understanding autistic girls. Now, this is just such a very important topic for me. I feel that girls are not identified early enough. We don't understand them. We're not giving them the supports they need. So I'm hopeful that, this episode is a great way to start off this important conversation. So why don't we first talk about why are we missing girls?
Well, that's a great question. Just by a tiny bit of a way of background, I am also a girl on the spectrum, a woman, and I was diagnosed at the age of 11. And I was kind of an anomaly in that way because this was in 1994 when Asperger's syndrome, which was my diagnosis at the time, now autism level 1, but it was just added to the DSM then. And, given that the diagnostic ratio is currently 4 boys to 1 girl, it was kind of an amazing thing for me to receive that diagnosis when I did. Most of the women I know who are on the spectrum were not diagnosed until their 30s, 40s, and 50s, correctly diagnosed, I should say, because many times women on the spectrum are misdiagnosed with other mental health conditions before receiving the autism diagnosis. And part of the problem is that the diagnostic criteria that we've developed to diagnose autism were developed observing boys. As we know from the history from Lee O'Connor and the observations that he made, this was all boys that he was looking at when he was writing about autism. And so that's what we tend to look for when we are thinking of autism. And autism tends to present differently in girls than it does in boys. And quite often, boys will engage in more external behaviors. There'll be meltdowns going on. There'll be aggressive behaviors, things that people can see. But a girl will tend to kind of internalize. Girls will be shy and quiet and, she's just sitting there reading and she's fine. And no, she's not fine. Just because someone is not engaging in aggressive or visible behaviors doesn't mean that everything is okay. And so we tend to ignore and overlook that quite often. And also the way we socialize girls and women in our society necessitates that girls and women are able to connect more emotionally and are able to be more social than boys. So boys are allowed to get away with, having atypical social behaviors a little bit more, and girls and women are not. So as a consequence, many autistic girls and women end up engaging in what's called masking behavior or camouflaging, which is hiding facets of our autism and kind of imitating the behaviors of our neurotypical peers. And so that's kind of why a lot of girls and women end up flying under the radar, because they're able to, it's a funny thing that we've been dealing with the COVID pandemic for over a year now, and we wear masks, right? That's one of the things that, and so many people have a lot of issues with wearing masks. Well, imagine wearing a mask every day for years and years of your life, decades. That's what it's like for many girls and women on the spectrum. It is, and then the only time they get to take that off is when they get home. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting. It destroys people emotionally and spiritually, maybe even physically, certainly on some levels, to have to mask constantly in that way. So professionals are just not trained to look at how autism manifests in girls and women, and our society doesn't want to look at girls and women who are strange, who display aberrant behaviors. It's I mean, so many of our tropes, even in culture and media, are around how women who are strange are ugly and misfits, and all these stereotypes and all these things exist because this is how we perceive women who are different. And so yeah, those are some of just a few of the reasons why we tend to miss girls and women on the spectrum.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought up all these important points, in that when children are young, typically, teachers are reporting when there are externalizing behavior. And also, typically pediatricians, which are obviously are seeing young children, they're not trained in figuring this stuff out. Now, I'm glad that there are lots more, education out there. We have a long way to go, but there are starting to be screenings, even when children are younger, for autism. But does that really meet, the idea of where a girl may present, right?
Mhm.
Because it's still based on that diagnostic criteria that was based on boys.
Exactly.
And so really, I'm finding as well in my practice is that when I see a girl, it's usually when parents are suspecting that their little girl may be on the spectrum, or their adolescent, or possibly a young adult is wondering, why have things been so hard
Mhm.
for me my whole life? And they're coming to me, and they've been suffering for so long wanting answers,
Mhm.
but they've been told, again, like you said, oh, they're quiet, they're shy, they're awkward, they're this. But as long as girls are quiet, nobody is making a big
Mhm.
deal of it.
Exactly.
Yes, definitely. And so again, I'm glad that there's more information out there about identifying girls, but we obviously need to do
Mhm.
so much better. So when we move into the signs to consider, if you think a child may be on the spectrum, it's interesting that you brought up already some really good things to look at. You mentioned shyness,
Mhm.
girls that are maybe more quiet. And that could be because, again, masking, it could be, hey, I've tried to reach out to others and I've been, met with unpleasant response. Maybe I was, turned away. Maybe I was treated poorly. And that would
Mhm.
also, be another reason why a girl would stop trying to
Yep.
be friends with people. If you're going to be rejected over and over again, you can see how that would just further,
Mhm.
create that internalizing.
Well,
Um,
I think, yeah, and I faced rejection over and over again. I was bullied all through school, and there was one girl in particular who I was desperate to be friends with. Looking back, I have no idea why, but I would continuously throw myself on the proverbial fire, even though she would be nice to me one day and then treat me like dirt the next day. I just kept on trying and trying, and so it's, I don't know which is worse, the desire to keep trying or the desire to stop trying.
right.
Um, both of them are heartbreaking in their own ways, and that was my experience, for a long time. And again, I went through some experiences too with professionals who didn't necessarily want to ascribe autism to what was going on with me. I've seen old assessments written about me, where they want to say nonverbal learning disorder. They want to say, you know, somebody said, "Oh, Amy is going to have an eating disorder because she's manipulative with food," and and saying things like, Amy doesn't understand sarcasm. Amy has no sense of humor. Amy is unable to display empathy. Um, and I was 9 years old when these things were written about me. I was 9. I was a child, and people were already deciding what I was without really even knowing. And so it can, and we these and my parents are looking for help, and this is what they're being told. And I can't imagine what that must have been like to read these things about your daughter, about your child. Um, but just the fact that what was on my IEP kind of went back and forth between autism and then something else, there was still that sort of uncertainty. I think, again, because I was a girl, even though the psychologist who diagnosed me knew what he was seeing and was very correct and astute. The school is a different matter, right? So even if you have great professionals who are doing diagnosis, you still have all these other areas to contend with, when trying to get help and support for your daughter, your child. The school is a big one of them. So it's about professionals coming together and looking out for the best interest of girls on the spectrum. And unfortunately, that just doesn't happen very often.
I agree. And, again, that's why this episode is so important. So we can, shed light and, bring up more conversation with this topic. And like you were mentioning earlier, there are those signs that we really have to look at. And, when you're talking about masking, it's hard to see sometimes.
Yep.
And so we have to be very observant. If a child's shy, we're maybe not worried so much, or if they're a perfectionist, that's kind of praised, right? So if you do grades are perfect, or, you do this or that, you're getting these kind of rewards, those social rewards from others.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, we create these perfect attendance awards, which I wish we would do away with, because perfect attendance by its nature is ableist against people who have disabilities, people who can't always be there every day. And then maybe you have somebody like, me, someone on the spectrum who may not be physically disabled, but who does feel that perfectionist compulsion, which I often did, because no one held me to higher standards than I held myself. I remember when I lost the spelling bee in elementary school, and I was furious at myself. I was so upset, or I came in second place in a poetry contest, and I was furious at myself for not winning. So these things can seem innocuous maybe when a child is young, but they can become more obsessive and become dangerous, especially when puberty kicks in and you're dealing with the hormonal changes and the things that every teenager is going through, and can manifest, in some dangerous ways, and in eating disorders, which there's a high preponderance of among girls and women on the spectrum, in self-harm behaviors like cutting and other types of harming behaviors. And all of those are a kind of an outgrowth of a need for control, because when you are on the spectrum, whether you're a girl or a boy, everybody else is always trying to tell you where to go and what to eat and what to do, and you have to be here and do this, and you feel like you don't have any control over anything in your life, really. So something like that becomes this thing you hold on to for dear life. And then what are you supposed to do when someone says, oh, well, what are you doing? And then they want to take away the one thing that you have control over. I mean, it's no wonder that unfortunately there's such a high rate of suicidal ideation among people on the spectrum, and suicide. And I'm no exception. I was suicidal all through school, and a lot of it was, not having control over my life and the things that were happening to me and around me, and thinking that life was always going to be high school, that it was always going to be like this. And it wasn't that I wanted to die necessarily. I just wanted things to be different, and I didn't know any other way to change that. So all of that was building. It wasn't as if I wasn't feeling any of this and it just came out of nowhere. But with boys, we're more apt to see it. When we're apt to see he's acting out, he's doing this, he's, and with girls, the destruction is all internal. And so we miss it a lot of the times. We miss kind of girls imploding slowly on a gradually building scale. And we often don't tend to act or do something until we start to see an external behavior. But it's almost too late by then. There's so much has already been happening long before then. So we have to get better at seeing those signs, as we were saying, at seeing those signs in girls and women on the spectrum.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that personal experience. And, it's uncomfortable for a lot of people to talk about suicidal ideation, but we have to.
Absolutely.
It's too important. And, again, these girls are imploding and no one's seeing it.
Yep.
Or because they may look more neurotypical than our idea of what they think autism is supposed to look like, then they're not getting their needs met. And I don't think being taken seriously.
It's either you're too functioning to need help, or you're too disabled to be worth anything. It's a catch-22. It's always, it's a problem on both ends, is that people don't think that you need support if you're, looking like you have it all together and you're doing well and you're, quote, high functioning, which is why I don't like functioning labels in the first place. Or people think that you're quote, too low functioning to be able to do anything, that you're incompetent. It's a problem on either end of the spectrum, as it were.
Absolutely. And so there are, I'm fortunate to work with a lot of girls and young women on the spectrum. And, I have learned so much from them. And when I see these same patterns over and over again, where they're just not listened to, where they might be having a meltdown because their bodies feel horrible during PE, but no one's listening.
Yeah.
And if they do speak about how they're feeling, then it's sort of brushed to the side. Well, here's the expectation. You
Yeah.
just have to deal with it. And so then you have even more masking.
Exactly. And we're also, regardless of whether you're on the spectrum or not, women are expected to make space for the needs and the emotions of others. We're expected to subvert our own needs, put them second, if acknowledging them at all. And that's as much of an issue that women on the spectrum have to deal with. And so we are expected to accommodate autistic men, and we're expected to accommodate make everybody else comfortable while we ourselves are in pain and ragingly uncomfortable. And how do you even begin to get your needs met and acknowledged when you don't even realize what they are? If you spend so long pushing them to the side and ignoring your own natural instincts and the things that you're feeling just to make everybody else feel comfortable. It's a difficult thing to unlearn after so many years of operating that way, which again might be another reason maybe that girls and women slip under the radar, don't get diagnosed till they're in their adulthood, 30s, 40s, and 50s, is just decades of doing that and making space for other people and ignoring ourselves. And it's, and people just expect it. That's what girls and women are supposed to do. And we need people to care. And right now it doesn't seem like anyone cares. And that's a big problem.
Definitely. And so, we talked about, school understanding, parents, people, neurotypical folks understanding, and really looking at this in a different way, where yet a sensory difference. Yes, we all have maybe dislikes about the way certain things feel or whatever, but this is times 5,000. This is not the same. And I feel like when it comes to girls, people just feel like, oh yeah, I experienced this too. And it's almost like it's downplayed. Like their experience is just like everybody else's, every other neurotypical person, and it's minimized. Their needs are minimized.
It's downplayed and minimized, and then we're made to feel bad because we're not handling it as well as everybody else is. I experienced this too, and I've dealt with it. I was fine. Why can't you? And it's destructive. It's absolutely destructive to a person's mental health and well-being and psyche to say, to do that. That's why I hate when people say, oh, everybody's a little bit autistic. No, you are not. Please don't say that. It's categorically false, and it minimizes and dismisses what autistic people go through and what we experience, and women especially. It like you said, it's not the same. And I mean, there are a lot of similarities, of course. Like I always try to emphasize that as different as we are, there are many commonalities with neurotypical. Certainly, I'm trying to, because that's my attempt to reduce the othering that happens when we talk about autism. But there are certainly significant differences as well. And the lack of acknowledgement of those just causes so much harm in the long run.
Absolutely. And so we talked about kind of that, the eating disorders and cutting, perfectionism, these kind of social differences. And, also with anxiety, and depression, a lot of times when girls come to see me, they've already have either anxiety diagnosis or depression diagnosis. And so again, it's, what are we looking at? Are we looking at, well, yes, that makes sense because they're autistic and they're being completely treated in a way that they're supposed to be a totally different person, and they're just getting through the next moment without falling apart. Of course that would cause anxiety and depression.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I was diagnosed with depression at the age of 12. And that was kind of the question. Was I depressed because I was autistic, or was I autistic because I was depressed? And I think I was depressed more because of people's reactions to my being autistic, and just, trying to navigate and exist in a world that was not built for me. And that age, 12, that's around 6th, 7th grade, middle school is just starting. And those are two of the most horrible years of anybody's life, whether you're on the spectrum or not. And I think middle school was actually worse than high school in a lot of ways. And it was absolutely brutal. And yeah, and so that was, but even though I was experiencing depression, it didn't mean that I wasn't autistic or that it wasn't, that's, I think it's a strange thing where we tend to think of one diagnosis happening at a time, that there can't be an overlap, but there often is. I mean, and I think I had anxiety as well to some extent, I mean, my father always says how hard it was to get me out of bed in the mornings, that I just didn't want to go to school. I can't imagine why. And I, just yesterday, I actually drove past my old high school, and it's interesting to me how small it looks now. It always seems so enormous to me when I was going there. It just seems, because it's your whole world when you're that age. And when something is your whole world, because you're there 5 days a week, 6 hours a day, it just feels like there is no escape, that there is no way out. And so that it's understandable how that can lead to anxiety and depression. But again, it's just that thing of how we're just not keyed into how that manifests in girls and women. And we just, again, no, she's just quiet. She's just, really intense about what, like, we just find ways to write it off instead of acknowledging it for what it really is. So.
Right. And again, that when you were talking about masking earlier, this idea where it doesn't matter if you're uncomfortable, you need to fit in this. Like, this is what's expected of you. This is what you need to do. So essentially be someone you're not all the time.
Exactly.
Because if you say who you are and what you need, it's going to be dismissed, or it's, no, you're fine. And what I've also found in the girls that I work with is that, they feel like they can't even say anything. And I think that goes into masking as well, because when they do start to say, I'm autistic, or they share that with someone, well, you don't look autistic.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Well, that's the thing I heard as well. I wouldn't even know that you were on the spectrum until you said something, or no, you seem like you're so smart. Or, they just, yeah, I may be intellectually smart. Sure, thank you. Yes, I'll take that. I get Final Jeopardy quite often, but social smarts are not the same thing as book smarts, and the smarts of getting along in our society are a whole different skill set. And so assuming that somebody is going to have that just because they might look neurotypical, or they might have, the book smarts, that does a huge disservice to folks on the spectrum, including girls and women. And I hear what you're saying about the clients that you see, because for me, it was more the fact that I felt like nothing I had to say mattered. That there was, that my self-esteem was so low, and I hated myself so much that I thought, I just don't matter. I may as well not exist. Because even though I was bullied a great deal, I was also ignored. And it was a running contest some days as to which was worse. Because at least if you're being bullied, someone's acknowledging you exist, even if it's just to spit on you. But being ignored is like, you don't even register in people's minds. And so I hope things are better now for girls on the spectrum. I know there have been a lot of changes since I was younger, but I know that it was tremendously hard for me. And it took a long time to get away from that mind frame of thinking that I was worthless, and then nothing I had to say mattered. And I often call myself a failed masker, because I did try, but I was constitutionally incapable of being anything other than who I am, even though I tried. And so I just was constantly reminded of how unacceptable that was. So it had a lasting impact for sure.
I mean, I can't even imagine. You think something so simple, such as it's okay to be who you are,
Yeah.
is what they need to hear. And be who you are, and I want to listen to what you need.
Yeah.
And that is a way to kind of open the door to understanding and supporting girls. Because what if, when you think about what if that happened, what if somebody gave that simple sentence,
Yeah.
this seems hard for you, can you tell me how I can help you? in this moment. I mean, things like this are what makes the biggest difference.
Mm-hmm. But even then, there has to be the acknowledgement of the fact that it is hard to ask for help also.
Yes.
Again, because of that perfectionism and that feeling of I should be able to do this. I'm smart. I should know how to do this. And if I have to ask for help, that means I'm stupid and I'm weak. And it's very hard to unlearn that as well. It took me years to be able to ask for help and to realize that actually asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength, because you're realizing that you're having a challenge with something and you're wanting to do something about it. You're not, and so it took me a long time to figure that out. And so it's a whole, so even if you say that directly to a girl, she may still have trouble asking for that help, because it's so ingrained that, and for us that, like, I want to know how to do this. I want to be able to, because we want to prove ourselves.
Right.
And so you still may not get a direct response in that. It has to, it's a process. It's just a long process.
I like that you said it is a process, because I think a lot of times that's where we stop. Oh, they said no, or they're okay. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean they are. It means
exactly
they have been taught to say they are.
Yep.
And when they're not. And, like you said, don't give up. It is a process. And really even reminding, an autistic girl or someone who hasn't been diagnosed yet, but is suffering, is you let me know that, anytime you want to say anything, I'm here to listen to you. And even
being a safe space for a person. Yes,
absolutely. That safe space when it feels like no space is safe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Definitely. Amy, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us. This has been incredibly helpful. And again, I'm hoping that, this episode really moves the needle for people who are watching and listening. I know parents and educators and clinicians are listening and watching. And also girls who are watching this and are going to feel more comfortable and empowered to be themselves.
Thank you. I hope so too. It's a conversation that's long overdue. I think we've started to finally talk more about girls and women on the spectrum, but we have so much more work to do, so much more to talk about. So I hope this is just the beginning.
Definitely. So I know that our watchers and listeners are going to want to learn more about you. How do they do that?
Sure. Well, I have a website, amygravino.com, that you can visit and sign up for my mailing list, which will keep you up to date with all my latest happenings and goings-ons and whatnot. I'm also on social media, on Twitter at Amy Gravino, Instagram, amy.gravino, and Facebook, Amy Gravino fan page. So you can find me in all those places.
Perfect. And I'll make sure to add that to the show notes as well.
Oh, thank you so much, Holly.
Thanks, Amy. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to click that subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like this episode, please share it with someone. It may just be what they need to watch today. If you're a parent, I'd love if you came on over and joined our Facebook group, Autism ADHD Group for Parents. If you're a therapist or educator, come on over to our group, Autism ADHD Group for Therapists and Educators. You're going to find those links right down there in the notes. Thanks so much, and I can't wait to see you in the next episode.
All content provided is protected under applicable copyright, patent, trademark, and other proprietary rights. All content is provided for informational and educational purposes only. No content is intended to be a substitute for professional medical or psychological diagnosis, advice, or treatment. Information provided does not create an agreement for service between Holly Blanc Moses Crossvine Clinical Group, the interviewee, Holly Blanc Moses LLC, and the recipient. Consult your physician regarding the applicability of any opinions or recommendations with respect to your symptoms or medical condition, or the symptoms or medical condition of your family member. Children or adults who show signs of dangerous behavior toward themselves and/or others should be placed immediately under the care of a qualified professional.